All right. I think you need to stop sharing so that I can start. That's the message I'm getting.
Then I'll stop video.
All right. I think that should do it.
You're up.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for that intro. And yeah, so as Dan said, this is Deb Rozeboom with GeoComm, and actually at the end of this month, I will hit 18 years with the company, and that is 18 years in dedicated GIS for public safety. So, you know, I've done everything from being the specialists and analysts, developing the data and going out doing field collection. In my early days, I actually moved to rural Georgia for 6 months to do a field collection, gathering GPS locations and gathering information on residents for a address conversion project from rural route and box to the first E911 locatable addresses. So that's back a ways. But since then, I moved from being a specialist into leading teams of specialists doing the same work, both building data, analyzing data, and preparing data for 911 systems. From there, I moved into project management and then eventually moved from Minnesota out to Oregon when my company acquired a small office here and developed our West Coast office, and have now moved into a product management role for our GIS services. So I have a lot of background on what we've done, both from the tool and solution side, as well as the GIS services that we offer. So I'm just going to do, you know, we're a sponsor of the conference, and I think this has been such a great event. I'm so happy to be a part of it. This is the sponsor showcase, so I like to call it our little GeoComm commercial. I am not a salesperson, so bear with me as I go through this. But just a quick overview of the company. This is a slide that has been recently put together. I really like just kind of a detail of who GeoComm is and how we're involved in the industry. And we are dedicated to public safety. We're an active leader and participant in all the industry standard groups. And this graphic on the right is something I really like that we put together. It really kind of gives you a by the numbers approach to the scope and reach that GeoComm has as a company. We've got 17 statewide NG911 projects, and then more state projects beyond that are not specifically NG focused, but beyond just state projects, we have every level of government you can imagine, from the smallest cities and counties and regions up to statewide and federal government projects. So we've really performed a lot of these services in a lot of different ways, oftentimes for areas that either have GIS staff but are overwhelmed and burdened with a whole lot of business lines they're supporting and just need help on the public safety side, or for areas, counties, and cities that don't have GIS at all, as well as tools that we sell to GIS departments that are fully prepared and ready to maintain data for public safety use, but could use some tools and solutions to just kind of help streamline those processes. So I'm just going to go through some of the solutions and the services that we offer, focusing in this list on the GIS Data Hub, and then I have slides coming up that are going to go into each one of these in a little more detail. But our GIS Data Hub solution, which is kind of our core central QC engine, designed for NENA compliance, but expandable out beyond for other business uses, business practices. Contributor is a cloud-native maintenance application that allows a non-GIS savvy user or addressing authority to communicate through a map and a web-based browser to say if, you know, if there needs to be an address added or a road name added or a boundary correction made, those types of things. It also offers the ability for an addressing authority to drop a point and suggest an address based off of the road centerline ranges. Our discrepancy resolution product is the flip side of that. So as non-GIS savvy users are reporting their communication through that map-based interface, on the GIS side, you want to be able to access that information and easily convert it into features and edits in your source data. So it's an ArcGIS Pro tool that is embedded and allows you to read from those that database of communication and convert that information into features in the database. Maintainer is a tool set that we've had for a long time that really pulls out all of the public safety specific uses from Esri's tools and solutions into an easy to access toolbar. And it's something, all of these solutions that I'm mentioning are things that our multiple teams of GIS specialists are using day in and day out and working with our product team to further improve so that it works not only for our teams as we're executing services, but also for any users that we sell the solutions to. And then that just brings me to our professional services, which is, again, those teams of specialists that I mentioned that are doing all sorts of projects, cleanup projects, analysis projects, GIS data builds, updates, maintenance, all types of things. And I'm going to go into each one of these a little bit more. So the overall GIS data management workflow, how this all comes together is really, you've got GIS data providers on the left, and that could represent, local governments, cities, counties, regions, et cetera. It could also be GeoComm's teams that are editing data on behalf of a city, county, region. But conducting those edits or receiving feedback and change requests through the contributor product, and all of that data that's being built and enhanced in your Esri environments can then be fed into GIS Data Hub, so that GIS Data Hub then absorbs it, performs ETL processes to convert it, does a series of QC checks that can be just out of the box NENA standard, NENA compliant checks for a Nextgen deployment, or they can be configured and customized for use in your local PSAP and CAD systems. For our statewide projects, we then move into a merging stage, which is you're taking all of the different counties and regions in a state, pulling it together and doing a secondary level of QC checks, because once you start pulling data together, you need to validate that there aren't overlaps and gaps between the data sets or any redundancies or issues among them. And then the last stage, of course, is the data packaging. And the SI, the spatial interface, is a direct feed into the Nextgen core service solutions, for those of you that are familiar with that. And then data packaging that can output data in a variety of formats, schemas, projections, et cetera, for use and consumption by mapping or CAD or any other programs that need to consume that data. So Data Hub is again that core, that sort of QC engine at the center where you upload your data, we configure it into making sure that we've mapped your data into the model that we're going to use to run the QCs. We produce a report at the end that gives you a nice summary or snapshot of where you are for each check. And then that's something, an easy PDF report that you can use, or you could give to a supervisor or anyone else that's kind of needing to know the quality or status of your data. And then you also, on the output as a GIS specialist, will get a subset of GIS features for any fallouts or discrepancies that were detected. And then you can zoom to that and interact with that fallout to make sure that is there a real discrepancy? Is there an issue with your GIS data? These checks also include comparisons with MSAG and ALI files that are critical in E911 and Nextgen 911 data maintenance and preparation. So you can easily interact with that output and make any corrections that you need to your source data, and then resubmit in kind of an ongoing process. You have to think of this as an ongoing process from on into the future, especially if you're in an active state with an active Nextgen deployment. So I talked about GeoComm Contributor. This is our cloud native GIS maintenance application. So in the upper left, you see a screenshot of the map base, the browser map that allows a non-GIS savvy user to go in and report either feedback or a change request as either a point or a line geometry, if the boundary needs to be bumped out, and they can sketch in how it needs to move. That gets reported in through the browser, and then on the bottom right, you can see that there's an ArcGIS Pro add-in called Discrepancy Resolution that then allows a GIS user to interact with what's reported, and as easy as just trace that record that was added and bump the boundary out to what was drawn, and then perform any other QCs that you need to make sure that in making those edits, you haven't introduced any overlaps or gaps. And it really allows a continuous feedback loop of communication too. So whoever submitted the change request or the feedback, that you can also indicate if you're in progress or if there's that change is pending, so that the one that reported it can always look and see if there's anything that needs to be addressed, or just what the status is of what they communicated. There's also a clarification needed selection. So if you need to ask a question back to clarify, where does this address point need to be placed, or is this spelling, real, in case somebody incorrectly reported the street name, or any boundary questions that come up if a boundary change is recorded. So that really is a nice way to allow a non-GIS savvy, whether it's your addressing authorities or really there's a number of use cases that this could be utilized in order to report corrections or needed updates to the GIS data in an easy way so that the GIS analyst or specialist can then take that information and easily convert it into features. Our maintainer tools, this is what I mentioned is a ArcGIS desktop-based tool set that we are currently evaluating which tools we're going to port over to ArcGIS Pro as well. We're finding that there was not a real widespread adoption of ArcGIS Pro for a while, but it's becoming more and more. And so now we're in the process of making sure we determine what we port over into that tool set to make sure this carries on. And that, as I mentioned, it's really about focusing on public safety and pulling the functionality out of the wide variety of Esri capabilities and putting it in an easy to use, easy to access tool set that builds on what Esri does as well. It's not just collecting Esri tools in one spot. It's about looking at that, building upon it, and making tools that are designed for easy and streamlined workflows to make the day-to-day work of maintaining GIS data for public safety as easy and smooth as possible. So those were our solutions, and I want to touch on our GIS Professional Services as well, because as I mentioned, we have several teams that are conducting work. There are in GIS departments all across the country. There are a wide range of capabilities as far as, does GIS even exist? Are there any department? Is there any department at all? Maybe there's a GIS department, but they're focused on tax revenue, parcel-based GIS editing, public works, utility type of GIS, all the way up to the most sophisticated, multiple business lines. Public safety is one. There's the range is huge as far as the capabilities, the priorities, and what these departments can do. And if the need of your data for public safety is beyond what you, as a GIS developer, GIS specialist, have the capability to do, we have services where we can step in and either, kind of augment your processes and work with a copy of your data to perform any needed updates that are required if you're in a Nextgen deployment, or if you have a CAD system or a PSAP mapping application that needs some work, the data needs some work to improve the location validation. So all the way from project management on the left through standards development, that's really more in our Nextgen statewide deployments, where states are looking at standing up a standard for all of their counties and regions to provide data in. Most often, the NINA GIS data model is at the core of any state level standard that's developed, but then we've worked with states to expand beyond that to build a statewide data set that's useful in multiple business lines and by multiple state departments to really leverage that and maximize the return on investment. So, and with all projects, there's some level of workflow development in all projects, from just simple conversations working through with an agency or a GIS department, how edits need to flow and how systems need to be updated, up to state level projects where, again, you've got all of these counties, and all of these regions that are looking now to not only conduct that work and improve their data, but also provide it up to the state level. And what are the workflows? What are the roles and responsibilities? I can't emphasize enough how important it is to know it, understand it, and document it so that that's widely available and accessible to all the affected parties. So then that GIS data development and maintenance, as I mentioned, we have teams that are building and maintaining GIS data for a number of counties and regions and states across the country. We also have the capability to take that data and turn it into web GIS web services. So if you need, if you're adopting any cloud solutions where you want to take the data that you're building locally and publish it up into a web map or a different application that needs to consume data that's hosted and published in the cloud, that data needs to live in the cloud as well. Not every GIS department has the capability, the licensing, et cetera, to do that. And so we've been able to offer as a service, if anyone is adopting one of these solutions and they need their data hosted but don't have the capability, it's something we can do as well. And then the indoor GIS development, I know you heard earlier in the week from Carrie Brennan about all of the different new and interesting things we're doing in developing data and mapping indoor spaces, and then making that accessible through our mapping solutions for use in the 911 center. So just a lot of things that we do as a company. And at the core of it all is this proven process where if you are starting any project involving GIS data, if you need to first assess what is going on as far as what layers do you have, what schema are you following, and compare it to the variety of databases that are impacted, your MSAG, your ALI, and then GIS checks in amongst the layers themselves. You need to first see where you're at, and then move into an improve phase where you're taking those discrepancies or errors that are found and correcting them and updating your data, and then segueing into a maintenance environment where you're really creating that constant feedback loop where you're correcting the data, improving the data, adding in your new roads, adding in your new points, and then submitting it for QC to make sure that as you are conducting your day-to-day tasks, that no errors are being introduced, or that if they are, that you catch them and correct them, and just continuously improving the quality of that data. So I'm going to wrap up with just a quick view of some of the states that we're involved with. I've mentioned the Nextgen projects. These are all the different states that we've worked with, and agencies across the country. It's a pretty big list, and every state has come at it a little bit different. And some want to do a gap analysis at the state level to start with. Some want to jump right into submitting data in an ongoing fashion. So the first run is kind of still that statewide analysis, but they just want to have the mechanism in place so that as people get their results, they can continuously be working on it, resubmitting, getting feedback, et cetera. So this is, I'm not going to read this to you guys, it's a wall of text. But again, just to show that every state goes at this a little bit different in the mix of approach that they do for Nextgen 911. But GIS is at the core of all of those NG 911 deployments. And so we can't emphasize the criticality of knowing the quality of your data, checking it often, and entering into that organized maintenance program. So I like to pause here for just a second, and I pulled out a quote from the Next Generation 911 Cost Estimate Report to Congress from 2018 that really talks about how the development and maintenance of GIS data requires specialized expertise and dedicated resources to support these functions. And this was a report focused on Nextgen 911, but really it applies to all public safety, and of course, even beyond public safety into all lines of business where GIS is consumed. But this is just a note to think about, you know, how are you doing locally? Have you looked at this problem? Have you looked at your data? Have you gone through any process to start thinking about what is your state doing? What is your region doing for a next-gen deployment? At some point, the whole country will get there, and GIS data is at the core of next-gen systems for validating locations and routing live 911 calls. So you can't start soon enough to look at this and make sure you have that time, that expertise, and the resources to get the work done. And how do you do that? By doing what you're doing right now. Attend webinars, workshops, and conferences. Look for the standards and keep on top of the standards by monitoring any revisions. Join work groups, join URISA, join MENA, join the standard, join the work groups that are shaping the standards so that your voice is part of that, because that's the way you really learn the best too, is by understanding how it works and then being part of that solution. You can look locally too at forming or joining local user groups and then meet regularly to collaborate, especially as you look at from county to county and your borders. Do you have your PSAT boundaries and your response boundaries aligned with your neighbors, and then beyond your immediate neighbors, then they go for their immediate neighbors. You may want to look at a regional based user group. Eventually, many states end up with a state level subgroup or committee that's focused on these things as well. And just stay informed of the NG 911 and public safety initiatives that are impacting your agency. It's really, there's a wide variety of things you can do to kind of get involved and know what's going on and where you need to start with looking at your data. So I think my 20 minutes, I'm probably right at the top. but I've got a slide for questions if there's time or anything's come up.
I don't see anything in the chat, although you've got your contact information there. So if anybody wants to reach out, or Carrie, or any one of the other 1,500 people that are out there, I could say from Washington State standpoint that it's been a good working relationship with GeoComm. They've been very responsive to any of the problems. Not only they're basically doing the data hub thing for our statewide ESINet, but they're also helping some of our less resourced counties to get a leg up, because some of our counties, more rural counties, this is true across the country, that they just don't have the GIS resources. You know, we even have one county has no GIS period, but
every state has the same range from
Yeah.
zero GIS to highly sophisticated GIS departments and capabilities, and every shade in between. So it's really interesting just to go in and see who can do what, who needs help where, and where we fit in that whole puzzle.
You have a question from Matt Goodman, the previous speaker. Is that have any LVF customers successfully deploying the LVF for non-NG911 use, like a state geocoder?
So it's an interesting one. I know that there are states that we're working with that have live NG deployments at the state level for ECRF and LVF. I don't know that they've converted that into an accessible state level geocoder necessarily that then gets made available to all of the local counties. I think it's really intriguing. It's something I'm going to bring to our product department and see, is that something that is being discussed? I know there's one element of the overall NG architecture that's called a geocode service. And I think it's meant to be a service that gets built up by each deployment and coalesced nationwide along with all of this data into an overall mapping data service. But I think that may end up being possibly a NENA sponsored project to ensure that it all comes together at the national level, the same way that they sponsored the PSEP registry and forest guide and other elements of Nextgen that have that nationwide impact. So yeah, there are definitely states out there that have deployed, but I don't know that they've converted that into a fully open access validation yet.
Yeah, and as Wendy said, thanks to GeoComm for your support for this conference. This was the inaugural run, and I think it's gone well so far. So definitely appreciate GeoComm stepping forward to help us out.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun being on the planning committee and helping bring this together. This has been a really great event. I'm really happy with the turnout and the questions and the engagement from all of the attendees. So I think it's been really pretty fantastic. Happy to be a sponsor of it.